Today on the CEO Barbecue, we're looking for silver and gold and maybe a little bit of copper too in Mexico across 3 states together with Silver Viper Minerals. For a bullet point summary of this and all other CEO interviews, please go to resourcetalks.com and subscribe to our free weekly newsletter. The company you're about to hear from has not paid us for the production of this interview, but this interview is still intended only for experienced speculators because this is venture capital and mining is a very risky industry where failure is the norm. All conversations are general and impersonal in nature, and they contain forward-looking statements. I'm not a licensed financial advisor, and my business sells content-producing services, which also makes me biased. So before continuing on, please talk to an independent investment advisor with a good long-term track record because your capital is at risk, and also visit setterplus.ca where you'll find the company's official filings. If you're not 100% sure you understand all the biases and the disclaimers that I just showed you, please go to the last section of this video and do not consume this content unless you fully understand and agree with everything said herein. That all said, the 3 assets that I referred to are in Sonora, Durango, and Sinaloa, but the flagship project here really is La Virginia. That's in Sonora, and it's actually technically more of a gold project because it's about a 60-40 split between gold and silver. How I know that is because there's a 2021 resource on it showing the potential for an open pit mine, then transitioning into an underground operation on about 400,000 ounces of gold and just under 200 million ounces of silver across the indicated and inferred category of the NI 43-101 combined. But Silver Viper believes the project has more to give, which is why they're now aiming to expand known zones and test new targets as well, all of which we'll talk about later on because they're targeting a resource update on this project by the end of Q2 of 2026. The potential growth engine for the company, though, is the Coneto project in Durango, which Silver Viper is now trying to acquire through an all-share deal, which values the project at about 21 million Canadian dollars, with Fresnillo and Oryx, which are then expected to become significant shareholders on closing. Will the deal go through? Why is the vendor letting the asset go at this price? And what's Silver Viper going to do differently are questions I hope I'll get to ask later on as well. Lastly, the Cimarron project in Sinaloa adds potential optionality for copper as well. So it's a copper gold or a gold copper porphyry target, which has a small inferred resource on it. Historic though, and Silver Viper has had this project since 2023, which, by the way, they also paid all shares for this project, but not all that much has happened here since. So what are the plans? Why is it getting the backseat? Again, hopefully more color on that later on. The company is listed as a Viper, so that's VIPR on the TSX-V, where the average 3-month volume is about 150,000 shares. The stock's 52-week high is $1.82, and its 52-week low is 16 cents. With a market cap of just over 150 million Canadian dollars and just under 88.5 million shares outstanding, today this is a $1.70 stock with a 50 and a 200-day moving average at respectively 112 and 62 cents, which means the stock is now trading well above both of them. Moving on to the share structure, over half of this company is held by institutional investors, including Eric Sprott himself, as well as Sprott Capital Partners that you can see on your screen right now, probably. And management owns about 15%. Friends and family are estimated at about 10% of the company. And that all means that just about a fifth of the company, or 20%, is in the hands of retail. Silver Viper is currently raising capital. They just closed the first tranche of what is expected to be a $17 million financing, which will add, or it adds those 21.5 million shares. I already calculated for it in the shares outstanding that I told you about, so the 88.5 million there. But it's also going to add 21.5 million warrants. So this is a full warrant financing. And they're coming in, those warrants are coming in on top of the already existing close to 20 million warrants with an average exercise price of 50 cents for the old one, while the new ones, the new 21.5 million warrants, are exercisable at $1.20. And there are also 6.5 million options with an average strike price of 72 cents. In total, what all that means is that there will be about 135 million fully diluted shares, which could result in about an increase of about 50% in shares outstanding if all those dilutive securities get exercised. And that could then result in about a 35% ownership dilution if, and that's always a big if, but if all those dilutive securities get exercised. Talking about money, I'll now go through their latest financial statement, which shows me the numbers as of September 30, 2025. At the time, the company had in total just over $4 million in current assets. 3.2 million of which in cash and cash equivalents. But that's, of course, going to be different right now after that financing that I just told you about. There was no long-term debt on the September balance sheet, but the accounts payable sat at just under $1 million. Moving on to the P&L for that 3-month period that ended on September 30, I see a $3 million number under the total expenses, but that number includes some share-based compensation as well as some amortization, which are, of course, non-cash expenses. And there's also about just over $500,000 of exploration expenses on top of it. So the out-of-pocket non-exploration expense, which I would generally classify as an admin expense, that was about $1.7 million for the quarter. And that's an average of about $580,000 with consulting, professional, and management fees making up the bulk of that expense. As to the exploration expense, as I mentioned, not much of that was going on in the last quarter. It seems that number was, again, at about $560,000 to be specific. That's an average of about $190,000 a month. And that was mostly going toward general exploration. So again, no drilling. I'm mentioning that because I like making two ratios normally here, one of which is the drilling to marketing ratio. But again, that's not possible in this specific case. And then the second one that I like making is the overall exploration to administration ratio, which last quarter was about 0.3. So it was under 1, meaning more money went toward running the company than exploration itself. And more specifically, it was about a 25 to 75% split in favor of admin expenses. Will that change anytime soon, though? Probably, but that is also something that I hope I'll get to later on in the conversation. As always, I would also like to remind you that exploration businesses do change relatively quickly, so these numbers may not be entirely representative of the current situation for Silver Viper, and I might be seeing things wrongly as well. So it is your responsibility to get those up-to-date numbers by visiting setterplus.ca. Now, for this to actually become a conversation and for me to start asking some of those annoying questions, I'll have to shut up already. And Steve, I'll give you the word here. But first of all, thank you for sitting down with me today.
No, it's a pleasure. We got to sit down at a conference for the first time not long ago, and I'm excited to dive in and go through the full story on one of your full interviews.
I am as well, and the pleasure is mine. I am looking forward to going over some of the basics here. I do have over 60 questions, so I don't know if we're going to be able to get through it on one conversation, but we'll definitely we'll book another one if it's needed. First time on the barbecue, though, so I have an obligatory question that I've got to ask. How do you like your steak?
Medium rare.
That's a safe answer. I was hoping that you'd go for some more blood, given that you're in junior mining. I'll take it though.
We've been beat up for too long. I got to be careful. I got to be safe.
That's true. No, you absolutely have to manage the risk. That does tell me more about a man than most other first questions. So I do like asking that at first. But jokes aside, I do want to start off with yourself and talk a little bit about incentives and management background and whatnot. Who are you, and have you made more money for shareholders than what you've spent during your career so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I can start with myself. I've kind of grown up around this industry. My father was a stockbroker who, when I was very young, in early elementary school, ended up taking over a junior mining exploration company that they had financed, and his, the shareholder base that he had put in asked him to take over running the company because they weren't happy with management. And from that point on, he ran junior mining exploration stock companies around the world. That one in particular was in Bolivia, but they've operated in Scandinavia and certainly more of a focus in Latin America, but Canada as well. So I kind of grew up around it. His younger brother is a geologist, so I spent a lot of time in elementary school and early on doing site visits and just getting kind of a feel for the industry. And then when I went to school, I went for business management with the intent knowing that I was going to be kind of coming back into the mining space after I was done with university. Got involved, came back in. I've now been in it for, I guess, 2 decades plus now. And I started back in on a company called Orco Silver, which was, obviously a great success that ended up selling in a bidding war between Coeur and First Majestic, with Coeur winning out. But that's the La Preciosa asset, which, as you kind of fast forward to time, is exciting because Avino's finally putting that deposit into production now, or has started. And with silver prices, I think you're going to see kind of the super pit there and really trying to go after the bulk of that 270 million ounces. So that's one of our group's kind of big successes. We also were behind Barcelli Minerals, which has become First Nordic, which I think is about to become Gold Sky. But that was a joint venture we put together in Scandinavia. brought in Agnico Eagle as a partner to free carry that project, and have grown that project now to the resource is sitting at 2.5 million ounces of gold in Sweden. It's going to be 5 to 10 million ounces, and is a world class tier one asset. There's a lot going on there, and we're excited for kind of the avenue of that company. Other guy, and so I've been around the sector for a long. I worked for Timmins Gold, which is a producer in the state of Sonora in Mexico as well, which was a very successful mine. That was kind of my foray into the production side, and made me, after being there for 3 years, realize that I like the exploration side. It's more exciting and it's more what interests me. I find the production side, running the company, very boring because you're just talking about your financials quarterly. It's very kind of simple marketing and it's not as exciting. You don't have the big, huge upside. So I've gravitated more to the earlier stage where we can make discoveries, grow it, sell it to the major mining companies. And that's kind of where I focus. Our group, we have Adam Zagelski, who joined with this Fresnillo transaction that we've announced. He's now the chairman on the board, but he's had a lot of experience in Mexico. Caden Resources was a big one that they sold to Agnico Eagle. We've got Ruben Alvarez, who was instrumental in getting that deal done with Fresnillo. His brother is actually the CEO of Fresnillo, the world's largest silver miner. And he also represents the interest of another investor who's gotten involved, named Javier Reyes, who's behind Gold Group and Luca Mining. Ruben himself works for Luca. So we've got those connections, and then Art Freeze on the board. He's the most pessimistic geologist in the world, but he's also very good. And when you can get him to give his thumbs up on an asset, you're onto something really good. And he's very, like you said, he's very pessimistic. He's not a geologist that wants to drill everything. He's very careful about what he wants to get involved in. But we're very proud and happy that he's given us the thumbs up here and Silver Viper, and continue to support us and support our geology team. But he's worked for Goldcorp and he worked for Cominco. He raised his family for a while on site. His wife, or his ex-wife I should say, ran Candente, and they raised their kids in Peru for a number of years on site, going around. He's worked all over the world. He's done, he's got an extensive database of every site visit he's ever done from the time he started in this industry, which has been over 50 years. And it's funny, when we actually acquired, or were looking at acquiring La Virginia, the project had a different name then, or the land package, but he had toured it through his time with Goldcorp, when they went around and drove around with some Mexican geologists and went all over Mexico, reviewed hundreds of assets, and he had notes on the claims, and he had actually recommended it back then to Goldcorp as something that they should look at acquiring, even though it had never been drilled and was an early stage claim. But he'd always liked it. So it was interesting when we had that, and then getting involved on that project, that it was just like a full circle moment. We were back in, and we were finally going to get a chance to get a hold of that asset. We've got, there's lots of others in the group, but it's always been a very good group. It's a group that's had a lot of success. We've had partnerships across various companies with Pan American Silver multiple times, Fresnillo, Agnico Eagle, Coeur, First Majestic, Hecla. They represent, they really know the level of work that our group does. They'll get involved on projects with us a lot earlier than they will some of our peer group, because they respect our geologists. They respect our kind of nose for discoveries, and also the fact that we do the right level of work. We don't cut corners. These aren't lifestyle companies. We are intending for, and you said it kind of in your intro, and it made me cringe because we're in between on drilling programs. But, we've always believed that, the bulk of any money that's raised needs to go into drilling, into exploration. And so that's obviously something that's always been very important to us as a group. The other part that's very important, and you mentioned, in the share structure, but management invests in we invest in ourselves. That's the best place, we believe, to put our investment dollars. So you'll always see on any of the companies that we've ever run, management having a very large stake in the company, and also being active and buying in the open market.
Do you currently run any other companies from within the group, or do you run any other companies, or is this the only thing you do?
This is the only one currently. We have a private vehicle that we're looking for another project and asset to put it into play. I'm on the board of Orex Minerals as well, which right now is kind of in a holding pattern and becoming, trying to reorganize there. We were obviously involved with Barceli and First Nordic, but now you've got Russell Bradford and the team coming in to take over that story. And so, yeah, my focus right now is currently basically 100% on Silver Viper.
How do you manage that potential conflict of interest there, though, between Oryx and Silver Viper, especially given the recent or the potential deal here?
Yeah, I mean, in the case of the transaction, I mean, they were the minority stakeholder. So all the negotiations were being done directly with Fresnillo, where there obviously wasn't any conflict. In my case, I had to step off and not be part of certain negotiations or certain meetings, when there was any talks between Oryx and Silver Viper. But in this case, Oryx was willing to go along with whatever was negotiated with Fresnillo, and we also had a fairness opinion done by Haywood Securities, who really drove kind of the transaction price was that document. And as metals prices were moving up, in the middle of negotiations, Fresnillo had actually requested multiple times to have that document updated to reflect new valuations and increasing prices. So we have to have all those things in place to make sure, like you say, that there is no conflict of interest or there's nothing. And also, for the TSX venture, our exchange, who is still looking at the transaction, we need to make sure that we can fall back on and show that things were done the right way and that there was no, funny business or any sort of weird stuff, or no one was getting way more value or less value than they should have.
Mm-hmm. We might touch upon that transaction and the asset later on, but I want to talk about something or ask about something that you just mentioned, skin in the game. You said that you insiders invest in their own company. You guys own about 15% of the company, according to your last presentation. Is that going to change? Your insiders participating in the recent $17 million financing?
No, yeah, there was insiders again on the recent. We had to cut ourselves back a bit because there was so much demand at times, and we wanted to make sure that we were bringing in some new, fresh shareholders. So we probably didn't get as much as we wanted on that last placement. But no, we're definitely involved. There's been insiders on every placement, and you're going to see that continue moving forward. We'll also have some new, I think there's a couple new board members coming that are key kind of investors that are independent that we want to get involved, that'll also be bringing capital behind and wanting to grow their positions as they get involved with the company as well.
Well, that's interesting. What percentage of that do you think is you personally? How many shares do you own?
Viper now, regular outstanding. What would I be? I am probably of that, maybe 3%.
Okay, so you would own what, 4 million shares?
Yeah, around that. Yeah, that's probably right.
What's the average cost that you've paid for those shares? Because I know you've had a rollback and everything. So do you know what the price is more?
I'm probably average. Yeah, I have to go back and look. But if I'm guessing my average cost is probably probably 40 or 50 cents in that neighborhood.
Post rollback.
Post rollback, yeah.
Right. Okay. What I'm really checking for here, Steve, is or what I'm looking for is cheap paper. Is there cheap paper within or outside of what management owns?
No, not. I mean, the cheap paper is where we were at, I guess. Post rollback, and right. We were coming in the financing that we did in July, the close when Eric Sprott took his first position. Mm-hmm. That ended up being a joint placement done at 15 and 30 cents. So that's the cheap paper at this point is that kind of, and that's got year hold on it. So none of that paper can come free trading until the end of July of next year.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, I'm looking for half a penny stock. That's right.
No, there's none of that anymore. That's
talking insiders and also having mentioned potential conflicts of interest and whatnot. Do you or any of the other insiders personally own a royalty on any of the projects that you have?
No.
Okay, good.
No, nice and clean. We've never had any individuals on any company that we have in the company actually own the royalties or own land that the company was paying for or anything along those lines. No. We inherited one where that was happening and had to correct it very quickly, but I won't say the name of the company.
Well, look, I like the fact that the question shocks you. It's not personal.
It doesn't shock me. No, I've seen it. It's not something that we would ever do.
Yeah. No, this about does it for what I call my smell test, a brief one here, because again, I have a lot of questions. I want to move on and talk about business strategy and whatnot, but it might be worth going way back first before we do that, because looking for silver in Mexico it's a tale as old as time, I suppose. La Virginia was worked before you picked it up. Why isn't La Virginia in production today, or why is it not with one of the bigger boys and them exploring it? What's the history there?
So yeah, the history behind the project was actually quite fascinating. It was originally found by mine finders who was operating the Dolores mine, which sits 100K to the south, just across the border into Chihuahua State. And what they did is they flew that whole mountain range looking for another Dolores. They settled on La Virginia being that lookalike project. They got on the project. It became their number one exploration asset. They did over 50,000 meters of drilling, but it was all focused on one small portion of the claims right on the southern end of the claims. And the reason, I guess, was one was that was the easiest road access, certainly, especially at the time. And they were using large track-mounted rigs, bulldozing in roads, so it was more expensive exploration than what we're doing now on the project. And then they were bought. They got bought by Pan American Silver in 2012 for $1.5 billion for the Dolores mine. They finished up the work program through 2013, but metals prices at that point, fell off a cliff from the previous cycle's high. And Pan American, a much bigger company, doesn't do grassroots exploration. Their exploration dollars are spent around expanding existing reserves and resources or far more advanced assets. And so the project ended up sitting on the shelf at Pan American for, till we got involved. And what happened is that Minefinders had a option agreement on the internal claims where actually all the work was done. They had staked and acquired between them and Pan American all of the surrounding claims around those internal claims. But the private Mexican company that they had optioned the project from was owed, a large multi-million-dollar payment at the end. They weren't entitled to any of the data. They hadn't seen the results. Only 50 of 188 holes were made public up until the transaction. And so it went on the shelf. Pan American was trying to outweight that private group, and you thought they would go and ultimately, get mad about paying taxes and would drop it, and they could just go back in and stake it, for free. But we were approached by that group in 2017, going into 2018, and they said, "Look, you guys have done, multiple joint ventures with Pan American. You have a good relationship with them. This is our situation. These are the results we know of. We know obviously the results must have continued to be good for them to drill another 138 holes from when the last result was, put out public." And so they said, "Is it something you'd be interested in?" And we said, the public information certainly, looked interesting. The company is an IPO. We had another exploration asset in Sonora over kind of to the western side of Sonora. And we had started drilling there, kind of saw that it wasn't matching our investment thesis as we were drilling it anyways, and really liked what we saw at La Virginia. So I picked up and talked with Michael Steinman at Pan American and said, "What's going on here? What are you guys doing with this? It looks like it's just sitting on the shelf and you're paying, taxes on it every year." And he said, "Make me an offer. And we'd love to do something with you guys," and so we were able to negotiate a deal with Pan American and a new option agreement on those internal claims that the other guys owned, and brought the whole land package back together. And the reason we really did that, though, was because, like I said, that we saw that all their drilling was done on the southern portion of the claims. And then when we got access to the database, we saw that neither Minefinders nor Pan American had really done any mapping or sampling on the rest of the project. And you could see the main regional structure, which runs for, over 100 kilometers. You see, this stuff outcropped as these large silicified dikes that you can see from kilometers away. And then to look at the database and to see that they never bothered to run soil lines, do any rock chip samples, was kind of surprising. But we knew that would be to our benefit, that we'd be able to get involved and make a new discovery on the project. And that's, once we got it, and at the end of our first phase of drilling on the project, that's what we did. We made a discovery at an area of the project called El Ruby, which has become, it sits about 4 kilometers north of where the previous drilling was done, up in in the main regional structure. And that's become the main event. At El Ruby, we start to see stuff that does look strikingly similar to the Dolores mine. We have the combination of these broad, low grades combined with, our high grade breccia structures. And, that's where 90% of our drilling has been focused since we acquired and got on the project. So that's kind of the history. I guess the reason why it's not in production was timing of when, and how isn't bigger is timing of the market. I think if Minefinders hadn't been acquired, they were, gearing up to expand and continue to explore on the project. And hopefully at some point they would have continued to expand and start to sample and test other targets besides the Los Huatas and Con Virginia area. But that's been kind of the story. We've been on it since 2018. Obviously, there was 3 bad years in the market where we were at a point where we should have been expanding our drill program and had to pause drilling. And have, finally resumed drilling, a month and a half ago. So it's overdue, but it's definitely going to be, with the program we got planned, going to be ramping up very quickly.
That's exactly where I wanted to follow up with, is that not a lot happened here in the last 3 years, taking some time to commit to a serious exploration program now, it seems. Um, how come? Why only just now? Is it really just the market? Is it financially related? Was there anything to do with the permits? Talk to me about those 3 years and what happened in those 3 years. Because again, it's kind of it's a natural thing with venture businesses, but at the same time, there was running administrative costs and not a lot of value was being created. And so talk to me about that period and talk to me why just now.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll give you the whole 3 year period. We were at a point where we were actually in the middle of doing a bought deal placement that was going to be a larger raise. We had 2 rigs turning on the project, and we're going to be adding an additional 2 and growing to 4 rigs. And this is going back now, 3 years ago, give or take the dates. But so we were at that point, and the market turned. The banker that we were doing that bought deal with said, just pause on this for a moment. Let's give it, a month and let the market come back and rebound and be just a bit stronger. And obviously that didn't happen in the market. We went through 3 very tough years, especially on the exploration side, and especially exploration in Mexico. We were kind of hit twice because we had a government regime at that point with AMLO running the country, and he had taken a stance against open pit permitting, and was being challenged in court by a number of, and just it painted a negative picture on Mexico as an investment area through those years, while we also had a very tough market in general for mining and especially the junior explorers. So we along the way thought there was various, financing windows starting, and we had bankers make promises, and that we would be, they could raise X amount of capital, and they would set the terms of a placement, and they would fall flat on their face. And so we would raise enough to basically, keep the lights on and keep doing minimal exploration work that wasn't drilling on the project. And it was very frustrating. And then you look back and 3 years went by, and it was crazy. Like, that has never been, our expectation and what we do as a company. So like you said, we were at a point, we kind of made our discovery at our project at the same time Vizsla made their discovery, and they timed the financing window and completed a bought deal about a month before we were going to be doing it. And that gave them capital to work and expand through the last 3 years, where we had to, really hunker down, cut costs, survive. In the interim, it did give our geology team an opportunity to step away from the drilling and really work on the mapping and sampling and going around the project, looking at how these different targets come together, how they relate to El Ruby. Coming out of that, in the start of this drill program, they identified a target called El Molino, which sits 2 kilometers east of El Ruby. And that's where this drill program started. It put 7 reconnaissance holes into that El Molino area, which is an area of, breccia structures that come together, and multiple structures, probably better width. Well, it does have better widths on those breccia structures than we see in the single breccia structure at El Ruby. So we're waiting on those assays. Hopefully we'll see those in January coming out as we hopefully get them back from the lab. And now the rig has moved back to the El Ruby area and started working on resource expansion drilling. We'll pause drilling here this week for Christmas break in Mexico. Everything just in general shuts down for about 3 weeks. And then when we step back into, with the raise that we've just done, when we step back in January, we're going to be adding 1 rig right off the bat, probably a 2nd rig very quickly after that, to start expanding that current drill program that we have going on the project.
I think we in Belgium can learn a thing or two from Mexico shutting down for 3 weeks. Tell you, I'd like that. And I like that you're giving me some of the details there, Steve, and we'll definitely talk about what you plan on doing going forward, as well as how you budget for it with the 17 million that you're raising now. But let's maybe set the stage first before and talk about why you're even doing it. What is it that you want to do with Silver Viper? Is it a simple kind of raise, drill, sell type of story, or do you have something else in mind?
I mean, that's always been our kind of general. We've gone 2 routes. One, we've done in the past as a group, we've done the JV model, earlier stage, do the free carry from a major. I don't think that's the plan here. Certainly not right now and coming into this market. The other plan, like you say, is to grow it. We'll take it as far as a feasibility study, but really what we're normally looking to do is to vend that off to a major mining company, and then move on to the next exploration story. I think in the market you're in now, we and the team that we're kind of bringing in, we also, you can never guarantee a buyout. We unfortunately cannot control the pockets of the major mining companies and make them buy you out. They have to come and make that decision, and it has to, align with where our share price is and what we want, and everyone needs to be happy. So I think with some of the team we have coming in and getting involved now, we have access to more mining engineers and other people. And so we will do the work. We will prepare as if we need to build the mine and prove out the concept ourselves. If someone comes along the way before then and says, here's an offer and we think it makes sense for shareholders, that's our preferable route, would be to sell and move on. But, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Right now, our plan and where we're positioning ourselves, and I think I'm jumping the gun from some of your future questions, but I'll give a tidbit here. Our plan and really how we're positioning ourselves is to be the largest explorer in Mexico. We saw Vizsla kind of have that mantle. Before them, it was Silvercrest twice. And we kind of always saw the premium that those companies commanded being in that position, being able to separate themselves from the peer group, running a program where you've got just that constant news flow on assets that you can produce, some pretty spectacular results. And we certainly have that here. And so we're kind of taking that mantle right now. We're targeting doing, at least 60,000 meters of drilling over the next 12 months, which obviously, again, we kind of spoke about ratios, and that will very much dramatically change the ratio of our G&A to our dollars spent on exploration.
Talk to me. I'm sorry for interrupting here, but talk to me maybe a little bit about what that means specifically. The largest exploited, is it by land, by meters drilled, by what is the largest?
By meters drilled. Okay. There's not really another explorer. Vizsla's raised 200 million now. I say they're still going to be doing a large program, I would imagine, infill drilling, but they're now a developer. So, amongst the junior explorers, the companies that are true exploration companies at this point, who's going to be doing the most meterage? And I believe at 60,000, that will certainly be us. If someone wants to throw a bigger number out there, maybe they'll challenge us on that. But I also think we're going to have a lot of room to grow that program based on success as well. So when I say that, I mean by meterage, just sheer volume of drilling, trying to rapidly expand resources, both at La Virginia and at Caneto once that deal, officially closes, which should be either in December here or early January. Probably early January at this point, again, because of Christmas break and dealing with a Mexican company. It'll be pretty quiet on the Fresnillo front over the end of December and dealing with their lawyers. But it was a very simple transaction. So it's just making sure that we have everything in place that the TSX is looking for, for them to sign off on it, and then Fresnillo to agree and the lawyers to go back and forth and just dot the I's and cross the T's.
Help me understand, though, in that case, where the other projects outside of La Virginia come into the mix, because you didn't do a lot of work on Virginia for a long time. And then now you've picked up more projects as what you call optionality. But why do you need more optionality if you have La Virginia and you can put all that drilling into that one project?
There's two sides to that. One of the main reasons is we heard from over the last 3 years, and probably further than that. But one of the things that we heard from a lot of the high net worths and the fund managers is they were really looking for companies that were multi-asset companies. They're kind of fed up with this junior space where all these different single asset explorers is coming constantly looking for money. They're getting, if there's 1,000 junior companies on the TSX Venture, they don't want to fund 1,000 companies. They want to reward companies that are bigger, doing larger work programs, have multi-asset, to de-risk, I guess, if something goes wrong on the one asset. And that was the general message. And so we've taken that to heart. It's definitely resonating with shareholders, as we've been marketing that plan, bringing on an asset like Caneto that already comes with 535,000 gold equivalent ounces on it, and seeing a path forward to being able to grow that dramatically and quite rapidly. And that project in particular, given the ties back to Orex, we were part of the team at Orex going back to when we were operating Preciosa that actually brought the entire land package together at Caneto. So again, we're very excited. We're very knowledgeable about that asset and know kind of how to explore that properly to really bring up that resource to a size that it now is on the radar and important to a company like Fresnillo, who has said as soon as we grow it to, they're looking for 200 million silver equivalent ounces in a resource today for them to spend their dollars on it. And so that, and then kind of if you're talking on the gold side, a company like Agnico Eagle wants to see, their threshold is 100,000 ounces a year for 10 years, or sorry, 200,000 ounces a year of gold production for 10 years. So kind of 2 million gold equivalent ounces is their kind of threshold that they're looking as a min size to put capital in behind a mine. And so our job and what we need to do with both of these assets is to grow it to cross those minimum thresholds, or at least that's our goal. We don't have to. We can obviously sell to a smaller company than Fresnillo or an Agnico Eagle, and I think we've already met that kind of minimum threshold at both. But our model and what we're interested in, why we're involved, is because we believe these assets have the potential to grow to a size that it will be of interest to those companies. And so both those companies have kind of, well, in the case I go back to Pan American Silver and Fresnillo, both kind of have understood that it's just going to sit on their shelf. They're just going to pay taxes, and they're never really going to add value to those projects. It's so far down the totem pole of where their dollars are going to be spent and where their time of their teams should be spent, that they get it. They understand the juniors are the ones that are going to make discoveries and grow and de-risk these assets to the point that then they'll step in and buy them back or buy them from, a different company if it's something they weren't involved in at that point. So they respect the work that we do. And that was actually, maybe I'm cutting off another question here and jumping around, but Fresnillo, as part of our negotiations with them, it became very apparent with them that it was equally as important to, the value they were getting out of the asset was also that the company that was getting involved was going to come in and do the right work. They said themselves, do right by Mexico, do right by the local community, add value, and not just, they didn't want someone to come in and run, a 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 meter program on the project. They want people to come in that are going to work it in a significant way, that it is going to grow the value of the asset and grow it, on a quicker timeline than a lot of other companies can do.
That's actually an interesting point as well. And I like that you're actually, I was going to ask you about the size. What is the potential size that would work here? With the $17 million that you're raising right now, would that be enough to make that happen? Is that enough money to get to that critical scale, or would you need more?
So I have to be careful here because there's TSX application stuff. So the TSX, because the Fresnillo transaction hasn't closed, I'm not allowed to use any capital from the $17 million raise on Kineto. So for them to have approved that raise, because they were happening at the same time. So that is more than enough to cover the expanded program at La Virginia to basically doing probably 30,000 meters of drilling at La Virginia, between the drilling program that's on now and the expansion for the next 12 months, and have room to grow on that. It is enough to do a small program that we would be doing later on the year on the third asset of Cimarron, where we are targeting kind of a smaller program to kind of see and poke at that in the second half of next year. There will have to be another raise to do the Kineto work because it can't come from the 17 million. Right. And but at that point, we're targeting doing 25,000 plus meters at Kineto as well, with the same type of plan that we have. I think at Kineto it'll be 2 rigs, where we'll probably have 3 or 4 going at La Virginia, but also room to grow at Kineto. And both drill programs, we're going to have 1 rig focused on resource expansion drilling, and another rig trying to make new discoveries to bring in new zones that then, once it's a discovery, we can start systematically expanding to bring it into a resource.
How much money would you need for the free? Because Kineto is a porphyry target.
No, Kineto's a vein target. Kineto's a vein target. Porphyry target is Cimarron.
Okay, I'm missing. Okay. I'm mixing those up. No, because I'm thinking porphyry targets generally need more money up front. So
Cimarron was found as a gold copper porphyry. I think I'm equally or more excited. There's a lot of vein targets on the Cimarron project as well that have never been drill tested. And I'm kind of more excited about those as well, because they have some extremely high grade samples on some of those targets from the past, not our samples. So we've got to go in, we're going to go resample a lot of areas of that project, get our team on the ground kind of over the first half of the year there, probably do some form of a geophysics program on some of the areas that we identify as being key and interesting. And we'll go back in and start exploring on it. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going in and starting a work program at Cimarron and plunging 1,000 meter hole into a porphyry and ripping through all the exploration dollars in 5 holes.
Yeah.
But I think we'll start with a 5,000 meter program there. We'll see. I mean, again, I think a lot of that is to be determined based on the field work that our team will do, the geophysics, kind of what we're seeing. It's that project in general, obviously, is also interesting because it's the northern boundary of that project now touches the southern boundary of Wishla's flagship that they're starting to build. So there's an obvious suitor there right off the bat if we find anything. And you'll also have a mill and mine facility that you could truck stuff to. So it's strategically a hot part of Mexico where lots of people have been trying to get claims and exploring. And so we'll get involved. We're going to work that one a little bit slower. But if we start to hit things that are, obviously eye catching, then we can expand the program quickly. And we'll have, with us doing another raise, I guess, at some point into next year to probably pretty early on because we want to get going on Canetto pretty quick. But with doing another large raise to finance 25,000 plus meters at Canetto, I mean, we'll be fully financed, technically speaking, but that will also be fully financed with lots of room to expand even on the 60,000 meters and not have to go back to the market. And with the share price, the way it's performing, I guess the other thing that can bring in dollars is those warrants that you were speaking of, that we would expect some of those probably to get exercised as people, start to be pretty significantly in the money.
Well, but talk to me maybe more about that because I mean, being the largest explorer in Mexico is all nice and well, but it costs a lot of money, right? And with pre-revenue companies, that money is going to come from oftentimes equity, and dilution is a big topic in Explorcos. And you've already done a rollback once, which is almost it's about as much as the market will forgive you about. I don't know if 2 rollbacks works well over time. You've got warrants outstanding after this recent financing, quite a lot of it too. How are you going to be doing financings in the future? I mean, do you expect mostly equity financings again with warrants, or do you see the potential for JV or a cleaner raise where like a strategic comes in, you don't have to do warrants, or how do you see raising capital in the future without doing?
From that transaction now we have Fresnillo as our, it's kind of our essentially already a strategic there. It was an all share transaction. So they're going to own around 17% of the outstanding stock and have the right to participate to keep that percentage the same. And they did that because they wanted, like I said, as much exposure on La Virginia as well on top of Canetto. So they're always, there's possibility if they wanted to increase and we were willing to let them do that, we could do a strategic there, or someone else could come in and do a strategic investment. But I mean, any strategic that way is still, you're issuing equity along with it. I think there's going to be one more large raise done that will basically, as you said, probably early into next year. And then at that point, we're very well funded with the warrants, the warrants from the last raise. You got 20 million warrants at $1.20. So again, any of those get exercised and you're talking about bringing in quite a bit of capital on top of that would fund any field. So I don't think after the next large raise, we'll be going back to the market for a very long time. And be very financed along the way to do that. I think that takes us, that financing level takes us to the point of where we would be doing that level of work, advanced work at La Virginia by the end of the year, possibly stepping into some PEA level work, depending on what we found and discovered and seeing how things are expanding. But I think we can get that and grow that to the size, kind of over the next 12 to 18 months that it's ready to go and a major should be looking at buying it. Which obviously then you talk about non-dilutive, if we don't sell the company as a whole and we sell the project, that obviously brings in non-dilutive funds. Obviously there's an asset going out, but there are avenues that way then that we can start looking, or if it gets advanced enough, another non-dilutive avenue is to issue a royalty, obviously to one of the streamers or something along those lines. And you could create a lot of non-dilutive on the share side value. Obviously you're giving up some of the value of the project by doing that. But there are avenues, especially as you get more advanced and larger, that things become attractive. Now with the way the share price is performing, and you mentioned the rollback, and that was one of the reasons why we did that rollback in January, was to really make the share structure tidy coming into the bull market, to have it where we can move now and have, the stock trading around $1.68 Canadian today, and financings now larger aren't dilutive, or they're dilutive, but they're not as dilutive as if, when we were back at 10, 20, 15, 30 cents. Obviously doing raises, 20, 30 million plus dollar raises are heavily dilutive. But when you have a strong share price, and in our case, so far we've been outpacing our peer group fairly well in this bull market, with people getting excited, the plan resonating with investors, the big, large, sophisticated investors that are getting involved in the company now. I think we see the share price continuing to move up. The numbers that those shareholders are expecting and are saying they're willing to support us in the market to achieve. I think that strengthens our balance sheet to, again, have raises, have everything else be less dilutive, and open us up to other possible options for financing as well.
Mm-hmm. That's something that I think we're going to be back to here in a second. It's interesting to hear that you would consider a stream or a royalty there as well. The money that you're going to be spending now, what is the split going to be between the two projects? Is it kind of an 80-20, or how do you split that? How do you see that split?
I think initially it's more at La Virginia because we don't have Coneto yet. But I think for the year, you're probably going to step into like 65, let's say 60 La Virginia, 35 Coneto, 5 Cimarron type of split between the expiration dollars, maybe for the next 12 months, with obviously room for that to dramatically change based on results and what we're hitting. If the deep target hits at La Virginia that we're going to be testing, that would force us to significantly ramp up further and change that ratio on the amount of work that was being done at La Virginia to do the deeper drilling, but prove up what, by investment thesis is supposed to be a multi-million ounce deposit in itself if it matches similar mines around the world that we've looked at. So there's obviously exploration discoveries that can change where dollars are spent very quickly. But I think both assets, we look at it as La Virginia flagship A, Coneto flagship B. It has lots of room to grow and has the potential to grow very quickly in size, similar to La Virginia.
Looking at my notes, Steve, I've got quite a lot of questions, as I told you early on, for each one. So it might be better to have you come back on for like a deep dive, maybe with one of your geos, and we can talk about each project kind of one by one. I guess in the sake of time today, what exactly are you chasing at La Virginia more broadly? So we're talking grade, scale, continuity, something else. What's the goal for this upcoming season, and what would you consider success?
Yeah. So, I think we've kind of told, and I've said this on a number of, like, my kind of goal minimum, I want to see that resource. We'll be coming out with a resource update on La Virginia towards the end of Q2. And my goal for that resource update really is to double the existing resource. So we're at about 700,000 gold equivalent ounces right now. And like you said, it's 60-40 gold, silver percentage wise. So I'd like to see that double. I think there's, maybe there's a lot of low hanging fruit there with just updating metals prices. That was done at 1,500 gold and $20 silver. So just changing metals prices will bring in more ounces. It would lower the grade a bit, but it brings in more ounces. And then with our drilling program, from our past drilling, we've already expanded El Ruby by 300 meters of strike to the south. It's still open at long strike and at depth. So really we want to, at minimum, I'd like to double that resource, make new discoveries along the way, and then see how that, can change. Obviously I would love our exploration focus there is twofold. It's resource expansion, but it's also making new discoveries. So we've already tested El Molino. The geologists like what they saw. They'd like to get a rig and start expanding out to the south, but we're just, we'll hold off on assays and see what's going on and what we're looking at, in the new year on that. There's lots of other targets in and around El Ruby that have been identified by geophysics or being identified by our surface mapping and sampling that need to be followed up on that could also be new discoveries. So like I said, we'll have a rig resource expansion, a rig at surface working on new discoveries, and then we'll have that third rig, which will be a larger rig that's going to come in and test El Ruby at depth. And so that deeper target that lit up in the geophysics program, and what we're talking, like you said, we'll do a different video, but very quickly, what we're talking about there is our favorable horizon has been this andesite package. Below that, you have a rhyolite package, which is a tighter, denser rock. So it doesn't allow for the big blowouts of mineralization that we see in the andesite package. But because of that, when those different mineralizing events in the fluids were coming up. When they hit that contact at the bottom of the rhyolite package on similar deposits, you have a large blowout of mineralization that is gold, silver, and base metals at that contact. And so that is what we were looking for in the geophysics. There is a very large, deep target that when your investors or the listeners look at, our presentation, you can see the slide where it, lights up this large blob sitting along the right orientation of what that contact should look like. And so that will be tested. If that hits, obviously, that's huge. The bottom of that target is about a kilometer below surface. The top probably starts around 450 below surface. So there's lots of room. Those are deeper holes, so if they hit, you'll have to expand the program there. But as far as the overall plan, testing El Ruby at depth at that target, working some of the other surface targets, trying to make new discoveries. Hopefully we already have one in El Molino. And if any of those hit and become a new discovery, that's probably a point where we add another rig. Every time we make a discovery, we'll want to add a rig full-time onto that target to start expanding that and bringing that into a new resource as well. At Caneto, similar plan. We'll start with 2 rigs. One will be resource expansion. There's 6 targets there that are in the current resource. Only 7 targets on that project have ever been tested with the drill rig. There's 40 known veins on that project. So again, what that project has is a lot of old workings that go back 80, 100 years old, where the small scale miners were following high grade veins, but they could only take it down to the water table. So a lot of those workings are, only 20 meters of vertical to maybe 50 at most of vertical component, where those traditional systems, they're going to be 300 to 600 meters kind of at minimum of vertical extent to the veins in that part of Mexico. So we think we can bring in a rig and just start actually putting the work in and testing a lot of these other targets, and a lot of them become discoveries in themselves very quickly. We certainly have an idea of, what our favorite targets are to go into right away on that exploration side, but we'll have one rig that's going to be working the existing structures, expanding on them, expanding on intercepts that are outside of the current resource. Because again, the resource there was done in 2021 as well, using $1,500 gold and $21 silver on that one. And so we can come back in, bring in ounces quickly on, intercepts that are outside of the resource, or just expanding, at strike or at depth on those existing targets, but then start to make new discoveries on some of the other, 33 veins that have never been tested.
Do you need it sounds like there's going to be a lot of ground disruption, if you will. Do you need any additional permits to do all of that work, 3 rigs and everything, or what do you currently have in hand?
No. So when you apply for your exploration permits in Mexico, you basically present to Semarnat, here's where the pads can be for an exploration program. They come out, they tour the site to make sure there's nothing, weird environmentally that you'd be disturbing or affecting. And then now with the laws, you have your agreements in place with the surface, with the landowners. In the case of La Virginia, we basically have 3 large ranches that kind of control the surface rights, and they're basically lease out their land and have some cattle roaming around freely in the hills. There's never been a problem. So we have about 3.5 years left, or 3 years left on our exploration permits at La Virginia, and Fresnillo's had all the exploration permits with Semarnat in place for Caneto to drill on there. We'll dive in further. We may have to apply to expand a bit there, but everywhere that we'd be drilling on La Virginia is permitted to drill for the next 3+ years. And we've never had a problem. Even under the previous government regimes, we never had an issue getting exploration drilling permits anywhere in Mexico. So I don't see any issues on that front. We definitely have permits in place to drill these projects right away. I think we'll have to apply for our Semarnat permits down at Cimarron. They're not in place because it hasn't seen work for a bit. But again, we've got lots of time to do that. And it's in an area, like we said, we've got Vizsla right to our north, and they've never had a problem getting any exploration permits. So it's very familiar, and it's a very busy drilling area in Mexico.
Is that the highest risk, permitting risk among the projects that you have, Cimarron?
Permitting for exploration, yeah. They're just not in place right now. So there's been permits granted there in the past. It's not that it's never seen exploration. Like you say, there was historic ounces found there, and multiple smaller public companies have had it and not had a problem getting exploration permits when they were doing that. But they only never did like 2,000, 3,000 very small programs on that project and hasn't seen a proper work program. So yeah, I mean, of the three, that would definitely be, I guess, by default, because we don't have the permit, the one that would be the riskiest, but I don't think it's a risk. I think it's a very safe area and a very easy area to get exploration permits.
Well, I ask that because of obviously the headlines that I see coming through about the Mexican government becoming increasingly more difficult to deal with, both in terms of what's possible and what's allowable, but even in the cases where a permit is obtainable, the timelines are ever growing, or so it seems. And of course, more so toward the latter part of the Lausanne curve, so development production, not so much where you are right now. But do you think any of this might influence maybe the appetite for M&A when it comes down to companies of your size and potential buyers? Or what more can you tell me about the whole political situation down there and how that might affect your business?
What I would say is that the last year has been huge for the confidence and the industry. We just, at the case of La Virginia, which I'm gonna go further back. So AMLO, like I said earlier, obviously, yes, the previous government regime in Mexico was far more open about and pandering to their voter base about not allowing open pit mining in the country. And that shocked the system. It was in a bad market. It was, like you said, that was part of the reason why we didn't get to do much for 3 years. We had exploration permits, but there was very hard to get capital of any sort in the sector, and especially hard in Mexico with kind of the rhetoric that was going around mining. Since Claudia Sheinbaum is taking control, she's been more progressive. She has said if you have existing claims and can make an economic case, you will get production permits. And what was exciting was about a month ago, the first open pit permit was granted, and it happened to be the closest modern project to La Virginia in the state of Sonora in Mexico. And Silver Tiger got their open pit permit. We've now heard that there's 5 or 6 companies that are expecting their open pit permits to be granted here over the next couple of months. And every single one of those that's granted obviously is huge for the industry. It's huge for investor confidence. But we have seen over the last 6 months, especially, a lot of positive sentiment towards investments in Mexico. It's the number one place in the world to find silver. It's the largest silver producer in the world. And people have become a bit more cautious on kind of number 2 and 3 being Chile and Peru. And so Mexico becoming more progressive and really kind of showing that, yes, you can make economic cases for it. I think silver, another thing that's not talked about as much as it probably should be, that's been very important, is silver getting added to the critical minerals list in the US. And that being something, where Mexico, a lot of the rhetoric has been, yeah, we really want to fast track critical minerals projects. They were talking initially, when they were talking about that, they were speaking more to their lithium deposits when she was running for office, and saying that it's very important that we put these into production. And the mining industry always kind of laughed when that was being said, because you had this rhetoric with the previous regime of no open pit permits, but they were talking about putting all the lithium deposits in production quickly, and we're saying all the lithium deposits have to be open pitted. So there was always this kind of disconnect politically with the rhetoric and understanding the deposits. But it's changing now. There is lots of positive things happening towards, and obviously seeing the first open pit permit granted was huge for us. Like I said, it being the closest neighbor to us to the north at the El Tigre deposit was also, an extra, for us, with La Virginia being modeled around an open pit heap leach to start. So again, I think it's opening up, and investors are seeing that, and it's becoming a much better place that investors are confident that, moving forward, Mexico is still going to be Mexico, which has a very rich mining heritage. The state of Sonora is, most of the mines in the state of Sonora are open pit heap leach operations. It's the largest industry in that state. The governor of that state, all the governors on the state level that we deal with, have always been very pro-mining and very supportive, and we're very upset at the national rhetoric. In that case, that governor was actually in the same party as AMLO and challenging him in court because it was the largest industry in the state and what the state's known for, and it was just killing their GDP by not allowing new open pit projects to come in and go to production. So again, a large part of Claudia's voter base is based kind of in that northern part of Mexico as well. And so they want open pit mining. They want lots of mining. And I think she's listening to her shareholder base and starting to really, and I would also say that in Mexico, it's still a lot quicker than other parts of the world. I think from talking with the Silver Tiger guys, they kind of applied for that permit towards the beginning of this year. And so they got their open pit permit in under a year's time, or just under a year's time. So that's pretty good compared to, the Canadas, the US's, parts of Europe where these processes take multiple years and are much longer.
Mhm. And that's from the government's perspective. There's other stuff that you also have to deal with, which are the locals. What is the relationship with the locals across the portfolio? Could start off with Virginia. That's the most important part. You're dealing with ejidos there, I believe. What does that look like?
No ejido. There is
Oh,
ejido
okay.
off the grounds to the east, and some of the ejido work for, they're some of our workers and helpers. But in our case, it's three private ranchers that we have our access agreements and drilling, agreements with in place, and access to drive on the roads and move around camp. But they've always been great. They've been great to work with, very easy to work with. Like I said, they're not on site.
Hmm.
They're easy. So that's easy. At Caneto, there is an agreement with Fresnillo in place with the ejido there. Um, Again, we were part of that. There's always been good relations with that local community. They've been very supportive when we put the land package together and acquired all the claims back in Orex over 10 years ago. It's again been, and one of the reasons we were the ones able to bring that whole land package together was because of the work we did at La Preciosa, where we also dealt with an ejido council there. And people saw the work that we did, how, we grew an asset, how we worked with the local community, and that spread. And that's where we were approached to try to, with someone who said, I think if it's you guys, at that time, I think we can bring this, because the Caneto was always a great mining camp, but it was all these little tiny blocks of claims. And then Fresnillo had a couple of strategic small claims in the area as well. And we were able to bring that back and acquire over 90% of the claims with the help of, a couple of well-known Mexican mining guys that were in those communities that wanted to work with our group and said, I think you guys can do it. I think we can do it if we do this together. And so we were able to do that. And it was funny when we did it, because we were joint venture partners with Pan American at Preciosa at that time. And they said, how the hell did you do that? We tried to do this 8 months ago and they shot us down. And so it was, again, it's kind of was the reputation and the level of work that we were doing that we were able to get it done. And then we identified Fresnillo, because of their strategic ground, was an obvious partner to bring in as a JV partner on that project fairly quickly.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I've gotten that wrong, but it's a good thing that you're not dealing with ejidos for the main project, at least. How's
Heels are
cartel?
great to deal with. Heels are fine. It's more individuals to deal with that you have to bring in, because it's an entire council or an entire community essentially that is voting and making decisions. In most of Mexico, you deal with ejido,
Mhm.
and as long as you're not, I think we've always been very good at all the projects we've worked on. We've never had an ejido council go against us or say no. You've got to put the work in with the relationships, and you've got to continue to work the relationships and work with the local communities. And we've always been supportive with those local communities as far as, whether it was providing medicine, providing school supplies, sports equipment for the kids, like at their schools, gifts for the kids around Christmas, toys and that. Just, with La Virginia, our group a number of times here over the last 3 years, when we've been stepping back, we've been the first ones on site when kind of brush fires start, or in that area in the hills, and helping the community fight them, working with them on keeping the roads in good standing. And as long as you're doing the right things by the community and showing and being supportive and not, trying to take advantage of them, and which isn't our intent. But I think a lot of companies get involved and think, they don't need to deal with the local communities as much as they should. And then they get negative, relations going, and then you're toast. Your project's history if you get to that point, because the local community is just going to say, you know what, someone else will come along. We don't want to deal with this group. Let's not let these guys get involved. Then you see it with some of the bigger mining companies at times too. They grow massive deposits and then mistreat the local community, or something happens, and you can get projects shut down that have hundreds of millions or billions of ounces of material, and you've always got to treat the locals right. And so most of our workforce at La Virginia right now comes from those local communities, Nacori Chico and Mesa Tres Rios. And we've always had open dialogue with the local mayor and the councils and the church, and just making sure that we're helping them. Obviously, we haven't had a lot of capital, but to whatever means we've been able to help and do stuff, we've always made sure we try and do that.
Right. How's cartel activity across the three assets? Again, different states have different activities. So how much, how much cartel activity is it? How much does that influence any of your operation, if any?
Cartel, and every community in Mexico has members of the cartel. There's no part of Mexico where don't have those members. It's obviously there's a lot of different cartels. We're pretty picky about which states we work in, and you kind of that belt that you see now where these projects are is kind of the northern and southern extension of what we want to do in Mexico. Maybe we might do parts of Zacatecas state, the south of Durango. That would be east of kind of where Cimarron is, maybe into Chihuahua state a little bit. But that's kind of our belt. And one of the things you really get through most of that belt is you have the largest cartel controls most of that ground. And, I think where you run into a lot of issues in Mexico is if you get into other states and if you are going to have problems, a lot of the times it's the smaller splinter groups from cartels or startup groups, and they are the ones who tend to not be as well financed. I find that the Sinaloa cartel, which is very famous, obviously Chapo and everyone, we remember, we know the history behind them, and they don't want that attention. They're obviously well financed. They have their own activities that finance them through. So they're not ones, that really want to mess with public companies. They don't want the government to be pushing back if they're kidnapping or doing any of those activities. Where La Virginia is, there's nothing grown in those hills. It's definitely not a shipping route for materials. It's very, a remote mountain range with no highways or anything going through the project. So there's always going to be people around the community. But one of the things we've seen over our decades of work in Mexico is that even if families are associated, they want their kids to not be part of the cartel a lot of the time. They want the local farmers that are at bottom levels of if they're associated with a cartel, they want their kids to work for a mine and get way better wages at a much safer, career. And they welcome you with open arms has been our experience. And so we've been great. Our team sleeps out. Globe Explorers, our drilling company, and runs the camp, and they sleep out in these large canvas tents with the guys on cots and sleeping bags overnight. And it's always been a very safe place to work. We've had good dialogue with the communities and never felt, we've got protocols as companies to try and avoid any situations. And, we go out of our way not to drive the highways in Mexico at night. As a rule, all of our trucks are marked that we are what we are, that we're, exploration, it says SV Minerales and has our company logo, and everyone knows, that we're the explorers and we're not coming in on, and I'm saying this for other site visits or anything, but you always have open dialogue with the communities. People know who you are. And typically we've always had very good relations and not had any issues.
You said nothing is being grown. Are there any competing interests for water across any of the projects? Because water, of course, a big thing in Mexico. So talk to me about water and talk to me about whether there are any, competing interests.
So at La Virginia, we have water year round. There's the various arroyos that come through, have creeks and streams and none of those are the water that goes to the local towns. That's not their drinking water supply. The major river that sits west of the town of Nacori Chico is where they draw their water from. So in our case, that's never been an issue. We do work with the drilling companies to make sure, they're recycling the water as much as they can. Not that there's any, negative chemicals or anything going into the water, but just as a general rule, we try to make sure that they're recycling and reusing the water that is going through the drill rig and for the core as much as possible. We've talked about, we've started to build at times, especially as we go into a bigger program, our own kind of holding ponds, because you get kind of rainy seasons there where it dumps a lot of water very quickly. And so it could be when we want the possibility, if we enter a drought or we really expand the program and we happen to hit a drought season, to make sure that we would always have enough water for drilling and not be drawing from those arroyos. But the only people that might be using some of that water would be the farmers. And like you said, they're not living on site anyways. And so we've ran multiple rigs at La Virginia, never had a problem. At Canedo, you've got the town there. You typically pull water and truck it to the rigs from the local ponds, or where you have your water access agreements in place. But it's never been an issue or an area where we would expect to have any water problems.
So you don't need any additional permitting either. Then you can just,
It's all part of the regulations now in Mexico too. Like you have to prove that you have, if you're when you're using water, that's part of, your relations and has to be part of the contracts with the locals, the landowners or access, and it's not expensive, but it's part of every contract, but it's not part of your SEMRNAT permit, no.
right. Okay. G&A I talked about earlier on. At first glance, it seems on the higher end because again,
Yeah.
you're not exploring. You said that that's going to change. Do you think G&A is going to have to go up though now that you're going to be drilling?
I mean, G&A doesn't go up because of drilling. I mean, that's exploration expense, but G&A, I think our G&A was high too because we had some turnover as well, with Adam and some of his team getting involved and a couple of employees kind of going out. That there was a severance package or two mixed into there, so there it was probably inflated above and beyond what it will be traditionally over time as well. Options is another one when they're granted that can mess with
Right.
because of the accounting rules of how they're treated. It drives me nuts. Like an option isn't worth anything but the company has to report that as the CRA, and everyone treats a cost and they
Yeah.
associate a value to an option on the balance sheets, which is always bizarre to me, but that's for the accountants to work on. Yeah, I would say, well, there'll be, what will go up is we'll be hiring a separate team to run Kineto as far as, our day to day and our helpers and everyone. So you'll have, but that cost to me reports more to exploration costs than it does to our general G&A of kind of our head office or our people up in Canada. So what you will see is as we have results coming out, our marketing budgets will increase a bit to reflect, just to make sure we're getting our story out there to investors. And, you spend all the money on drilling, you want to make sure that you spend a little bit on the marketing side to make sure people are actually seeing the results and hearing your story and what your plan is. So that will increase a bit in the new year. I think some digital marketing and things on that front, but the bulk, I would say 75-80% of the money will be spent on drilling,
Right.
What's being raised. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, I do typically take out share-based compensation because it's a non-cash expense, so I don't really look at that. I do take it out unless it's egregious. Then I do talk about it. Marketing, though, that's a good point. I see that you've announced a consulting agreement that will cost you $17,500 a month for an initial period of 6 months, running out at the end of April, I believe. So that's over $100,000 total. What are you hoping to get out of that? I also saw you doing some other stuff with Red Cloud and whatnot. What's the goal? What do you want to do with that?
Yeah, Red Cloud's more a market maker. Red Cloud, the services with Red Cloud is just making sure that you've got, just so you don't get huge spreads on your share price and going on. But we are going to be starting a digital marketing campaign in Germany. We'd like to really get in front and grow that investor base and kind of the European investor base through that. And that's just started, I think, this last week. And we're already seeing the volumes there move up quite dramatically from where they were. And then we're also going to, in the new year, there's going to be a large program that you've already seen announced with the company that's doing it, but that'll be focused on US based marketing and trying to grow that retail base and get in front of kind of some of the more of the higher net worth there. But we saw kind of with First Nordic actually that they were programs that worked very well. And so we've kind of cherry picked the programs that they were running over the last kind of 2 years, the ones that they saw that had a lot of success and resonated with shareholders, and they got really good return on the dollar spend. And so we're going to be incorporating a couple of those programs here, mainly really ramping up in the new year to coincide with drill results and continue to see what works. But that's where those dollars will be spent. We're just trying to grow the investor base and get the story out there, because for a lot of people, they haven't heard the story and it's brand new again, and this new model for the company, like we said, where we're trying to be the largest explorer and get that in front of as many people. And like I said, we've seen, in person that's resonating, and obviously it's helped the share price, and we've had really good share price performance as people are positioning themselves for, with all the news flow and with the catalyst of the resources, both being updated at La Virginia at the end of Q2 and Kineto at some point in the second half of next year, that people want silver, and watching the metals prices run, especially over the last, kind of couple weeks here with silver. There's not a lot of names out there that have exposure to silver. I think our mix is pretty good at 60-40 and 50-50 at Kineto. It gives you the economics that gold right now, which are fantastic, but silver playing catch up. And there's not a lot of quality names that are going to be running large programs that have exposure to silver. And certainly what the feedback is from investors, but they like what we're doing and like what we're going to be able to produce. And I think, that's so if we can get that story out in front of more people, where, all the shareholders will benefit for that.
Mm-hmm. So all in all, when that's taken into account, I mean, the larger program and whatnot, what is the how much in marketing and everything? How much is the G&A going to be? What are you out of the 17 million that you're raising right now? How much of that is going to be G&A over 2026?
G&A,
Just everything. I mean,
yeah,
paychecks and marketing and everything. Not yeah. Just
yeah. If you're
everything.
throwing marketing into that mix, I would
Just
say it's
everything that's not
yeah,
going into the
not
ground.
drilling.
Yeah.
Um, of the 17, I would say probably four-ish should be like G and all in G&A, and
Okay.
the rest will be drilling.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm guessing, just
Right.
off the top of my head. That's that's
No, that's good.
that's about what we're thinking, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah. Good. And again, it'd be good. I see the time's pushing for you, and so I'm going to work toward wrapping up. It'd be good to catch up as you're drilling and some of these results start coming in, and so we can talk a little bit more about the geology and what exactly is going on at La Virginia and the other stuff, and the potential porphyry target there as well. Interesting that I noted. So it's been good. What is the most fair criticism of Viper that you've heard so far? I mean, now that you've marketed the story across Europe and whatnot, what's the biggest pushback that you're getting?
I think the biggest pushback, and one of the things that I've tried to reiterate is I think we right now our share price is running quicker than a lot of our peer group. And so people are kind of saying, well, why are you commanding the valuation where your peers are struggling? And I think
Hmm.
some of that comes back to the scale of program, is that the companies that are running or talking about running small programs aren't necessarily financed yet, or have done financings that were much smaller. They're not getting the same traction. And so I think I've had to push a little bit on why do you deserve valuations. And one of the things I've also been trying to preach, I think, the sector as a whole is lagging, is no one's getting a proper valuation for ounces in the ground that they should, based on the move of what metals prices have done here over the last year. On the gold side, like I'll always remember this from our days working Barsele and First Nordic, and Agnico Eagle had a slide going back, 5 or 6 years now, but they had a slide in their deck that bragged about paying, I think it was 138 US an ounce in the ground over all of their acquisitions over the previous kind of like 5, 6 years. And the reason they had that slide and were bragging about it was they said, they acquire all these companies for about, that amount per ounce that's in the current resources. But by the time Agnico was putting in production, the cost per ounce was actually 25 or 35, because they would then step in and drill and add additional ounces on their projects. But to me, the industry has kind of used $100 US an ounce in the ground for gold for a very long time. Going probably since I started in the industry, it's kind of been this number that's been stuck. And when you see metals prices, like especially gold, move up the way it has, in a year, the producer isn't supposed to get all of the benefit of the move up in metals prices. You shouldn't be getting 100 US in the ground now. Companies should start to gravitate towards dramatically higher numbers. And one of the things I remember from when I first started, the rule before I was in this industry used to be a third, a third, a third. When a transaction happened, a third went to the company being bought, a third was kind of cost, and a third was the upside for the producer. And at a third, a third, a third, you were talking about like $300 gold, and it was $100 an ounce in the ground. And then inflation happened, obviously metals prices, and so it kind of stuck for a long time. But now that we're in this market where gold's at 4,300 US, I'm not saying we have to get back to a third, a third, a third. That would obviously be fantastic, but there's certainly a lot of room for metals prices. So where I think companies should be getting, and you'll start to see it as M&A picks up and companies start buying the quality assets and actually having to pay fair prices for them. But you're going to see companies start to get valued at 400, 500 an ounce, gold ounces in the ground. Silver was kind of one of those that was stuck around $1 to $2 an ounce in the ground. And now as silver prices move up again, companies should be getting, the explorers should get a lot of credit on that side. So I think, as you come into this cycle, a company like Agnico is going to start bragging about paying, 400, 500 an ounce, and they'll have that slide 10 years from now in their deck saying, over the last 10 years, if they were paying that, and they'll say, the costs were this, and then look at the upside because gold prices is trading whatever the number is. And I think we have a lot of room for gold to run a lot higher too over this cycle. But that is one of the biggest things in pushing back, because investors, it's been a tough market. And so people are still pretty beat up from the junior market. Obviously, they're really happy about most share price performances across the board this year with their investments, those that stuck it out. But that is the one I think we're educating people and showing and saying, like, look, these things shouldn't be valued where they are now. And, not only do I think the value should move up, but we're going to be doing work that's going to add, no matter what you want to use, and then we're going to add a lot of ounces at whatever valuation you want to use. So I think that's why we're getting treated, and people respect and see that we're delivering. We've said we're going to deliver on financings. We've said we're going to deliver and get a drill program going, which we already have at La Virginia. Now we're saying we're going to be the largest explorer, and people are resonating to that story and putting more of their dollars behind us than they are other peer groups.
Yeah. Has anybody given you any pushback on being a one country company, and that specifically being Mexico?
I think not now, because people, like I said, are getting more excited and coming back into Mexico. In the past, I think there was, and we were looking, we were always looking with different vehicles and different companies, but we were looking at, something in Canada, looking at areas where there was, different jurisdictions, and it's still something that could be on our radar if the right opportunity presents itself. We'll never say, no, we're only Mexico. It may be something where you start working for a bit and then spin it into a new vehicle, because it's one of the things we had in the past when we were operating Oryx. We acquired the Barcellay asset in northern Sweden in Oryx Minerals, which had a new discovery in Mexico, but it was an opportunity that presented itself. The geologist knew that belt very well and said, this is something we need to get involved in. And then, we actually at one point spun Barcellay out into Barcellay Minerals, which became First Nordic. And when we spun it out, it was an instant double for shareholders in valuation, because we finally just saw with two kind of flagships there that were in very different jurisdictions. Investors were focused on one or the other. But I think in the short term, or if the right opportunity presents itself that we think will add value for shareholders, we would look at something that made sense if there were synergies, or if it was something that we thought was too good to pass up. But certainly our focus in the interim right now is Mexico and trying to grow those assets that we have in the company right now.
So not even in Mexico, you're not planning on getting any new assets?
We're always looking. Again, if the right opportunity presents, one of the things with this relationship with Fresnillo and the trust, and especially as we continue to deliver, if we're delivering on Canedo, they have other more advanced assets in their portfolio that, they may decide that they want to move on from, but they're going to be very selective of who they would do that with. And so there could be more advanced assets there that present themselves. Javier Reyes and his group are, through Gold Group and Luca and their other connections, have ideas on projects that they want us to look at all the time. And so there are lots of submissions constantly. And if the right opportunity presents itself, it's not something we're going to say no to, but we also don't want to spread ourselves too thin. If there is a point there where there's too many assets and too much work in that to go around. So I think, 3, 4 kind of max, if we're working on them, is kind of the peak of what we'd want to be at. I think we can always grow, but at some point, you're just spreading yourselves a bit too thin. But there's definitely room for one more, at least, kind of significant acquisition. And then if we sell one, then that can free up time in that too.
How long do you think the company is going to be around for? I know I promised we would, we'd wrap it up here, but just one last thing, to the best of your guessing abilities, knowing what you know now, because again, you're adding assets or maybe not. And how long do you think the company is going to be around for?
Again, it depends what the end result is. I think La Virginia La Virginia, especially, I think by the end of the next 12 months, with where, if things go the way that we're envisioning and we've expanded that resource, up to levels, we probably start on P. I think it's very much at that point a takeover target for a lot of people. We have companies already under CA that have liked what we're doing and have been following, and in the bad market, we're trying to buy us cheap. But I think it's very much in play, especially as this metals market, even if it just sustains, over the next 12 months. But I think it's going to go higher, and I think there's going to be a lot of pressures on the mid tiers and the seniors to really try and grow or get bought themselves. So it's very much in play. Kineto could be as well, maybe a slightly longer timeline, just because we'll be going there a little bit later. But I think any of those, as those resources grow, if someone comes and makes an offer that you can't refuse, and I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on people wanting to act earlier to try and get projects, because especially with any exposure to silver, there's not that many of them out there. So I think ours stands out. We've shown that it's a very, a quality asset at lower metals prices. So now, with this environment, it's one that'll be ahead of a lot of others. Both projects will be ahead of a lot of kind of our peer group as acquisition targets. And I mean, again, Javier Reyes is behind Gold Group and Luca Mining, and their companies that want to expand too. So, his team's obviously very well aware of what we're doing in those companies, and they're someone who could come in and possibly be looking at doing something. So lots of options, lots of different people with eyes on it, and we'll see. But I could see one or both being very much in play kind of over the next 12 months.
But you do see the opportunity for essentially not. I mean, you don't think the company has to sell as a one thing. Like you could sell it for parts as well.
Yeah. If we sell the company, it also could be that we just take it's getting bought for one asset, and then and that's the other nice thing about having multiple assets is that if you get bought at the company level, you can insist and spin out one of the assets into a new vehicle, and existing shareholders get a dividend of shares in a new vehicle at either a ratio or at par, or depending on valuation and what you're looking at. But like you said, we spun out Barcelli, and it was an instant double for shareholders out of Orex. We saw Silvercrest 1.0 spun out Las Chispas and then grew that into a mine and then sold that for over $1 billion. So there's a lot of value in spinning out quality assets into new vehicles. One, you've got a ton of capital behind you at that point because everyone's just had the win. They're well capitalized. Management's certainly, they're capitalized, and the key investors are capitalized. And you see the next kind of one come in and grow and expand and become a bigger deal much quicker than the first time around, because there's that much extra capital and eyes on a group with success. So I think, if we got bought on a company level, so you would spin out, if Lamborghini gets bought, it could be that we wrap up and spin out into a new vehicle, Cimarron and Kineto, or anything else that we bring in, or maybe one of the assets if someone's really keen on keeping and wants to give you an extra premium for the other assets. But there's lots of different options on that front of how you treat a takeover.
Right. Well, as I said, Steve, you're going to be back in, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about some of these things. So I'm going to let you go here. What's your most favorite criticism of me? What do you wish I would have asked for that I didn't when you come on here? What do you want to talk about?
No, I think you did an awesome job. I don't feel like I got roasted on the barbecue too bad. It was pretty good. So I think from our first interview, I know how technical you can get. And so I know what the next, as we dive into the projects, and I'll make sure I got Jose Luis or Gernot or one of the geos, on the call with me. And then, because I know you really want to dive in on the geology and talk about certain things that I can go pretty far down, but I think you can go even further. So we'll bring them on. But I think it was a great intro, and I wouldn't complain or push back on anything. I think it was an awesome interview, and I enjoyed it very much.
Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate you doing this, and I already am looking forward to our next conversation. So thanks again for doing this.
Appreciate it. Anytime.
And as always, thanks to everyone for watching Resource Talks. I have a couple of more things to say, though. The fact that this company was interviewed here today does not mean that they're necessarily a good or a bad company. I'm not here to endorse nor attack anyone. I am simply here to ask some questions. If you find that I have failed in asking a question that you would have liked to hear an answer to, which will happen as I'm not an experienced interviewer, please let me know, and I will try to correct that mistake in a future interview. As mentioned at the beginning, please understand that mineral exploration and development is an extremely risky business. Losing money is the norm and should be the expectation. This is a very complex sector, and the performance of individual companies typically depends on many different moving particles, including company-specific factors like geology, financing ability, and many others, really, as well as particles that are outside of the company's control, like geopolitics, macroeconomics, commodity prices, and many more, most of which are nearly impossible to fully understand. Moreover, these companies that typically get interviewed on Resource Talks are in the pre-revenue stage, which means they rely on the public markets for the financing of their operations, which could result in shareholder dilution. Furthermore, as a general rule of thumb, you'll be better off understanding that all company communications online, albeit this interview or their website and their presentation and their social media accounts, or even the social media accounts which you thought were your friends and then told you about a stock, everything really that these companies do is intended as marketing. And although I do not make buy or sell recommendations because there is a clear conflict of interest given the nature of my business, many out there do. And you should be aware of that inherent bias, and you should be careful out there. That bias is not always going to be clearly disclosed with everyone out there. So it is safer for you anytime you're watching any type of company specific content to approach it with a dose of skepticism and assume that the party telling you about it is biased in at least some shape or form, because there will always be a bias, again, albeit clear or not. So always ask yourself what the incentive of your counterparty is and never rely on them regardless of their incentives, but instead double check if what they're saying is true, again, by using setterplus.ca. The fact that I have no idea what I'm doing should already be clear to you at this point. I am not saying this to make jokes or laugh with myself. I just simply do not have a long enough track record of consistent investment profits. So I should under no circumstances be considered an authority on anything. Again, although this may sound amusing to you, believe me, it is not amusing, and it is not intended as a joke. I'm simply pointing out a fact and warning you not to rely on anything I do or say. Unfortunately, at least to my understanding, nobody out there has any special abilities. The CEOs do not possess any superior knowledge, and they cannot know about what will go up, what will go down, or what will go in circles. Some people even believe that to be rule number one on Wall Street. Nobody really knows. None of us know whether any of the company's activities will result in a success, again, given that we're talking about high-risk activities where most of the times it ends in failure. So unfortunately, try as I may, I won't always catch all red flags or all challenges with the companies. So even if I did ask a few tough questions in here, don't rely on this being all of the tough questions. Again, these are complicated startups with many moving parts, and I am conflicted given the nature of this business. Therefore, I cannot guarantee the quality of anything presented in this video, and you cannot hold me responsible for any losses or damages stemming from the way you decide to use this interview. Viewers, listeners, and readers acknowledge and agree that the information presented herein did not constitute a solicitation or an offer to buy or sell any security or investment or to participate in any trading strategy. Resource Talks and all parties involved in the management of the business strictly disclaim any and all liability for losses and or damages, whether direct, indirect, special, or consequential, or other consequences, however so caused, arising out of any use or reproduction of the content published by Resource Talks or any decision made or action taken in reliance upon it. By consuming this content, all consumers vow to release Resource Talks and all parties involved in the management of the business from all claims, proceedings, or consequences. This is all to say, I know it's a lot of lawyer talk, but this is all to say that you shouldn't blindly trust me or anybody on the internet, and you should do your own research. Once again, social media is meant for entertainment. It is setterplus.ca where you do your research. That's where you'll find the company's official filings, and I encourage you to read and analyze the Management Information Circular, the financial statements, the Management Discussion and Analysis, and whenever available, the NI 43-101 technical documents. If you don't understand everything in those documents, the chances of you losing money are even higher than they normally are in this space. And as mentioned earlier, the chances of even the best analysts in this sector losing money are extremely high, since this is venture capital and it is not for everybody. I'll leave you with one of Charlie Munger's quotes, which I wish I had listened to more often earlier on, which says, quote, "If you don't understand it, don't do it."